Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I come to you with wet hair because yesterday I happened to read 2 3/4 books for the Believathon, and I originally vlogged the entire experience of reading yesterday. After I'd read the books and reviewed them, I began to feel somewhat guilty because I felt as though I'd been unnecessarily harsh on them. The whole point of the Believathon is to be celebrating middle grade fiction and to be championing children's authors. And the way I talked about these books yesterday wasn't doing that. And I was bringing my very critical, writerly eye to these books in the incorrect way. And when I say the incorrect way, I'm talking about the fact that a few years ago, when I was reading books, I was constantly reviewing them as though they were all trying to be breathtaking Man Booker winners. And we can all admit that there is something wrong with that way of reviewing. What we have to be doing when we review, well, what I have to do when I review is look at a book and think about what it is trying to do, what its aim is, and who it's aimed towards. And I wasn't doing that yesterday. I was being particularly grouchy. I was having a bit of a funny day, and I've regretted what I said about these books. So those videos won't be going online. I'm a bit annoyed at the fact that I won't be using any of that footage, but I feel somewhat better not talking terribly about books that I was looking down on yesterday when I've had time to think about them and properly come to you with a review today. The first book that I read for Believathon was The Boy Who Went Magic by A.P. Winter. 10 years before this story begins, Bert is left in a boarding school by a man he has no memory of. He has no memory of who he was before. All he is given is a name by the school and a surname because they don't have a lot of R's in the register. 10 years later, Bert is bullied. He's looked down upon by his fellow students who take the mick out of him because of his lack of parents, and he isn't having the best of times. They go on a school trip to the museum where all of this kicks off. Bert accidentally activates a magical object in a world where magic is outlawed. He ends up with a scar on his hand which transpires to have given him some magical powers. The story then moves on from there as Bert ends up on the run from the law and from the evil prince. When I mentioned this book in my wool gathering video, I said that it's great. And this book is. It reminds me somewhat of a BBC Christmas special. You'd have it on for an hour and a half. It's a great romp through adventure and then it ends. Personally, I think it's a bit of a one and done book that I don't need to go back and reread this. I felt as though it did lean heavily onto some classic tropes we've seen, and I kept seeing links to other pieces of literature. However, I don't know that that's a bad thing, because when I'm looking at this from the perspective of a child having read this, a child is not going to have probably read as much as I have done in 27 years as they have done at 7. That's not me being mean, that's just me trying to make the point that the things that I'm calling tropes that I've seen done a lot now are probably all right to use in children's fiction. I'm not saying there can't be a twist on them, but what I'm saying is that whilst I saw this book as predictable and I knew where everything was going, I don't think that a child would do the same. As an adventure story, it's definitely tense, and I finished the book over a period of 2 hours. It's very fast paced. It keeps on moving. I incorrectly stated in my TBR that the character of Finch had mechanical legs, and she doesn't. She is a double amputee whose father has gone to this museum to steal some magical legs for her so as she can walk again. Personally, I think that this story could have been built upon and it could have been longer. I am going to be gifting this to my cousin's son because I think he will get a lot more out of this book than I have done. The characters are more like archetypes used to tell this story. I felt very much as though the professor was this mentor type figure we've seen in a lot of children's fiction, and the children are just coming along for the ride. It makes sense that Bert would chase after the professor because he's having such a terrible life. Ultimately, I would have liked to have known more about the world. I feel as though there wasn't much world building going on, and I felt as though it was missing some things. but for a children's adventure story, I think that it does what it set out to do. Then I read The Nowhere Emporium by Ross Mackenzie. We have a similar story here in that Daniel is living at an orphanage after the death of his parents, and he is being bullied. As he is being chased through the streets of Glasgow, he comes across the Nowhere Emporium. He shouldn't be able to enter because the place is closed, and then he also shouldn't be able to return the next day because people who visit the Nowhere Emporium forget about its existence upon waking the following day. When Daniel is nearly hit by a car, he ends up saved by the mysterious Mr. Silver, who is the owner and creator of the Nowhere Emporium. The Nowhere Emporium transpires to have people's dreams inside and is run on imagination. And I felt that this was an interesting concept. However, I really don't think that it was executed well. When it mentions that all of these rooms have different magical things in, I was thrilled by that idea. I don't feel as though that aspect of the story was talked about enough. When you're told that there is this magical emporium that has all of these different worlds, you want to see these different worlds. You want to know, why is it so magical? Why do people want to be here? And like, I understand they're going to forget it the next day, but I want to know that it isn't going to be forgettable anyway. I want to know that it shouldn't be forgettable, that it's so amazing that it should linger in people's memories. And I didn't get that here. I felt as though this was a story of two parts, as though it was trying to be this whimsical tale of the Nowhere Emporium, and then it brought in this tale similar to Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, with a mentor and an apprentice fighting against one another. And whilst I think that that can work on most occasions, it added a sense of drama to the narrative that was necessary for the story, but also then ended up not really being expanded upon enough, so that certain aspects of the story felt as though they were failing. I understand that there's a sequel, so you might be able to see more in that, but I wanted to feel certain things the characters were feeling, and I didn't feel them because I didn't feel as though there'd been enough time for me within the story to do so. I also felt as though you were told the story moved incredibly quickly in terms of time, and I know that the characters travel in time. It was very much like Doctor Who, with this child ending up running through time and space with this Mr. Silver. And I think that if your child is a fan of Doctor Who, or you're a fan of Doctor Who, you might enjoy this story, but I needed it to have more. I needed the characters to be more rounded so that I got a sense of emotion towards them, that I could feel the loss that they were feeling, because there were some very dark aspects in here that reminded me of Neil Gaiman, and I feel as though this story could have pushed itself further than it actually did. It very much stood on the precipice of a great narrative and just didn't give itself that final push to get there. It was another failure in world building for me. I needed to understand what was at stake here. In the beginning of this book, you're constantly being told that Daniel could be kicked out of the Nowhere Emporium and made to forget it exists. And then when that was said, I felt, well, that's a moment of tension that could be built upon. But then I felt as though we were never going to actually see that loss, because even if Daniel felt some sadness at the Nowhere Emporium no longer being there, he wouldn't remember it. So I don't know. I want to champion children's literature and middle grade fiction, and I don't want to be such a negative person about the first two books that I read, because I can see the merits within them both. I just feel as though neither of them had that brilliance that would keep me revisiting them, because sometimes I do revisit children's books and I have as much fun as I did the first time, and it's one of the great things that I enjoy about middle grade fiction. And with these, I very much won't be seeking out the sequel for this, and I won't be rereading this one or even thinking about either of them again. I imagine that I'll find them both a bit forgettable, and I don't like that I'm saying that, and I feel mean. Perhaps I wasn't as mean yesterday in my vlogs as I imagined, but I felt as though I was. You know, it is children's fiction, but I think that there can still be great writing within children's fiction, and sadly I don't think that either of these books did that. I then went on to read A Darkness of Dragons by S.A. Patrick. I am only 239 pages into this one. I want to finish it within the next hour. I planned to finish it last night, but then the midnight feast for Believathon happened, and whilst I wasn't feasting on anything because I'm currently off sugar, I did sit through the entire thing not reading, and then I was too tired to actually continue with this book. So I'm going to finish this one today, and then I don't know what I'm going to do because I want to get some writing done today. I want to make an apple crumble for my sister who's been back already because she arrived home early, but her course has finished. She's done very well, so I'm treating her by making this apple crumble and then buying her a Chinese for her tea. But I've also got to clean the kitchen, and I don't have any children's books on my phone that I could listen to whilst I'm doing that. Oh, and I also need to edit my wrap-up. I also did a bit of an unboxing yesterday in which I was mildly annoyed at Amazon because the books that they sent me were not in the best condition. And I'm not sure whether I'll include that clip, but there was one book in there that I keep looking at and thinking maybe I should get to that at some point this week. But there's so many books that I've got to read this month. I don't just have the Believathon going on, I have non-fiction November to read books for. And sadly, at the moment, I'm just in the mood for the children's books. Just send me all the magical middle grade fiction because that is what I want to read. I might even be rereading some off my own shelf because I'm in that mood at the moment. It's that I've moved from this mood of wanting everything to be about Xena warrior princess and very warrior women battling and magic and all that fun stuff. I'm out of that mood now, and now I'm in the mood of magical middle grade fiction. Let's get this writing done. Let's just power through and just I have some energy, and I don't think that's a good thing because sometimes when I get some energy when I've been previously ill, it comes back to bite me in the backside. But I'm going to leave things there. If you thought I was too harsh on these books, then please do let me know. If you've read either of them and would like to discuss them, then please feel free to do so in the comments. And, you know, send me some middle grade recommendations. What, if you have children, what is currently their favourite book? I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.